Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Nerd Rabbit podcast. I'm glad today to be joined by a couple of leaders here at ReluTech. So for those who are not aware, Nerd Rabbit over the last year has actually merged with one of our sister companies, ReluTech. It's funny because I actually started with this whole organization a long while back as a technical recruiter with ReluTech before getting into the product management game at the dawn of this Nerd Rabbit software platform. But today I'm glad to be joined by Seth Hester and Ryan Norton. Seth, I'll let you start, introduce yourself real quick.
Sure, happy to. Thanks, Chris. So, name's Seth, CRO at ReluTech. Started with the company in 2014, actually, back when it was Relus Technologies, doing a lot of the same things we do now as a partner with AWS for the last 10, 11 years. We spun off in 2014, a consulting arm of our company, Relus Cloud, that we eventually sold to CloudReach in 2018. And so I spent 5 years with CloudReach as part of that acquisition, and then came back a year ago to lead the sales effort. So excited to be here, Chris, to talk about some of the challenges we're solving related to the VMware dilemma and having Ryan alongside me. Ryan?
Yeah, pleasure. Hey guys, I'm Ryan Norton. I'm the vice president of our AWS practice here at ReluTech, and I also work with several of our channel partners as well. I've been working here at ReluTech going on about the last 9 months, but much like Seth, I've been dancing around this company for a long time. I met Mark Metz way back in the day when he had Canvas, and that got sold off to Avnet distribution, and Mark and I kind of crossed paths in that direction. And then I met Seth when I was the AWS Alliance leader at CloudReach. We've really enjoyed working together, and I think we have an outstanding message. And so Seth and I are extremely excited to bring this value to ReluTech's new iteration as we bring all of these sister companies together under one banner. And we're stoked to talk to you guys about what we have to bring here today.
Awesome. Well, glad to have you guys on. It's exciting because one thing that's interesting, you guys have both been in this space for a while now, and you've seen some things are similar. Migrations keep on happening. New native cloud builds keep happening. Changes in hardware create changes in how someone might affect their infrastructure approach, be it on-prem or cloud. And that's kind of where today's discussion comes from. Every year there's going to be some big changes in the tech world that get a lot of people on their toes, and this is one that has been pretty substantial for anyone in the tech space who has been around VMware. For anyone who's outside of the know, Broadcom acquired VMware a few years back, and this year there has been some announcements. It has to do with the licensing costs of VMware, and there's going to be a significant increase in those prices in the coming years. This presents a unique challenge for customers that are using VMware, and for those who are listening and are aware of that environment, it's often pretty large that you might be exposed to VMware. So a significant change in cost can be quite impactful on the business. So naturally, as I said, people are on their toes figuring out what's the best steps for me to deal with this for the best business outcomes. But I'm going to toss it off over to Ryan here real quick. You work with all of our various partners over at AWS. You work with also other partners we have at other solutions integrators. Tell me a little bit about what you're hearing.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the general consensus that I have is that a lot of people see the change that this brought to the, if you call it the migration view landscape for most customers, is it's kind of brought a sense of urgency to needing to make some decisions on this. But the interesting thing about both the VMware challenge and the SAP Rise challenge that we aren't even going to get into here on this podcast, but is that they've actually created a lot of momentum for customers who have on-premise environments who are looking for paths now to get out to the cloud more effectively and take advantage of cloud computing. And the way it's been described to me most effectively is this is like you have a big hurricane off out in the Pacific Ocean, and it's headed directly for you, but it's a good week or two out. It's like people are noticing that it's a problem. We're starting to sense that it's a problem, but I don't think a lot of people put their plan in place on how they're going to address it. And from my perspective, what I'm hearing is that a lot of customers are waiting till the last minute and taking what we call the Broadcom tax, and that's the 5 or 10x increase in your costs while they figure out what they're going to do next. And I don't think that's the best approach myself. Seth, I don't know if you have more to add to that.
Yeah, it's a lot of what we're seeing on the customer side too, right? I think there's some wishful thinking from customers as they're waiting for this Broadcom renewal quote. In some instances, we hear from customers, they can't simply get a response from Broadcom. They know the renewal's months away. And then 2 weeks before the renewal, they're hit with something 2x in good scenarios, 6x or higher in other scenarios. And Ryan, I think you put it perfectly. That hurricane you kind of see out in the distance, you know it's coming. Oh, but it's still a week away or 2 weeks away. I think we're here, to give customers options, but also we need to be in front of a lot of these decisions, which is why we prompted to do this podcast to get some of this out there, to tell customers, even if your renewal is a year away or 8 or 9 months away, it's never too early to start looking at potential options. And then it would be fantastic if things changed down the road for you and you wanted to stay on VMware, that Broadcom didn't increase as much, but at least we're here, right, to provide an option, to provide you a way to potentially get to AWS or another cloud provider safely, securely, in a stable manner.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things where you don't know what your increase is going to be until it's effectively too late, unless you have a plan in place. And as far as that goes, kind of to your point, Ryan, with those price changes, there's a lot of people who infrastructure is maybe for their business concerns. It's not the top of mind, right? They are focused on whatever their business delivers to their customers, their value. And IT infrastructure assists in how they do that, but it's not what wakes them up in the morning. But the business can't function if costs aren't kept in check. And this is a huge blow to critical elements of these businesses. So we're here to remind people of the importance of keeping on top of this, but also that it's not all doom and gloom. There's options. They're the same ones that admittedly in some ways have been around, whether it be cloud migrations, whether it be changing how you go about supporting hardware. There's a lot of different things you can do, but it's having a plan. And I think that's kind of what we want to get into today, some of the plans that we're working on with some customers right now and making sure that we've hurricane-proofed some houses.
Well, it's a good way to put it, Chris. And the one thing I haven't heard, you asked me a little bit ago what I have heard. What I haven't been hearing, though, is I haven't been hearing anybody in the IT department saying, hey, they gave us unlimited budget to go do whatever we want with as many people as we need, right? And the reality is that IT teams are being asked to do more with less. The IT landscape is shifting very rapidly, and the things that you knew even 5 years ago may not even be applicable today. In fact, I think some people would say, 5 years ago, hey, go start out being a coder. And I think with the resurgence, if you're the surge in AI capabilities now, I tell people straight up, just stay away from that that topic altogether, because the technology is moving fast, and my point is that if you can't keep up with it, it's hard to make these big hitting decisions. And it's why a lot of companies get analysis paralysis when they're trying to figure out what is the right answer for me, because frankly they have 50 people coming to them saying, hey, we're the right answer. And we take great pride in just being a small piece of the solution, but I think that the piece of the solutions that we provide are very, very impactful for the customer and can actually move the needle in helping getting a customer migrated out to the cloud.
Yeah, I mean, from what you mentioned there, and to what I was saying before, every company, whatever their reason is for existing, it's often not to maintain their IT infrastructure. That is something that assists them in what their purpose is. Anything we can do to make that a more cost-effective and functional, more headache-free situation for you, the more that frees you up to do the things you are made to do. So, that's really what the conversation's about. How can we help you get back to the things that actually matter instead of having this looming over you?
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Now, getting back kind of into the dilemma. Now, I guess painting the picture of what this looks like for a customer, like what it looks like when you actually are facing what's coming.
Yeah, Seth, I don't know if you want to take it from the customer perspective. I can take it from, kind of ours and AWS's. I don't know if you want to start with the customer challenge.
Yeah, Ryan, I think let's start with AWS if we can. Okay. What you're hearing from them, maybe some of the partners in the ecosystem. I'll tie that back into what we're hearing from customers, in the joint go-to-market between us and Amazon.
Sure. Okay. So the challenge that came about really was, and you called this out earlier in the intro, Chris, is that, Broadcom acquired VMware several years ago, or a couple of years ago, and, it's become apparent that as we discussed, and this is my point of view, as workloads become easier and easier to migrate from cloud to cloud or from on-premise to cloud, the challenge isn't, it's very difficult to get from on-premise to cloud. In fact, lift and shift migrations happen every single day. It's really a lack of having people on staff that know the technology to be able to utilize it in the same way. And I give this example a lot where, a customer might have 30 people that know VMware and have been working in VMware for the last 15 years, but they've got one person who's got an AWS certification and maybe does a little bit of AWS here and there. And so there is a knowledge gap, but the bigger challenge, and the reason this became such a compelling event, in my opinion, is that Broadcom and VMware are really only throwing out to customers a 30-day decision window. In other words, when your bill is coming up due and your contract is coming up end of life, they're only giving you a 30-day notice to say your bill is going to go up by X%. You need to move from a on-premise perpetual license into a SaaS licensing. And oh, by the way, you've only got 30 days to make this decision. And the fact is that if you're not prepared and you don't have the right time constraints laid out for you for your migration, 30 days is not enough time to make a decision and move. So that's why I say, again, a lot of customers are choosing to take the Broadcom tax. But also VMC on AWS, which was the VMware looking interface at AWS, has also gone away. So now there's a challenge for customers who want a VMware-like interface that interfaces with AWS. So we have another challenge in being able to get customers on board with their AWS migration. And the fact of the matter is that AWS sees this as a both a gap and an opportunity. And I think that the opportunity portion that they're leaning in on is being able to get customers out of that decision-making process, show them that the AWS tool stack and everything that AWS has to offer is more compelling, and actually get customers out to lifting and shifting to AWS. That's my perspective.
Yeah, I think one thing to add there on this is, this is for customers with perpetual licenses, right? A never-ending license that Broadcom has now acquired VMware and said, no, we're no longer going to support you on that license, and now you need to move to our new cloud SaaS-based license. And by the way, it's 3 years or more, right? There is no 1-year contracts, right? It's a 3-year minimum, which when a customer renews and does that, who's to say they're not going to increase it again in 6 more months or 12 months from a pricing or licensing standpoint? And so really getting ahead of this for customers is what ReluTech is focused on, right? Giving customers options and time. If you've renewed and now you're in a 3-month window, it's going to be tough to modernize and do the things you want to do when it relates to moving to AWS.
Yeah. I mean, and kind of to Ryan's point, it's two sides where customers are kind of getting a bit of a raw deal here, and the choices they're being faced with are going to come fast, and if you're unprepared, it's going to feel a bit uncalled for and rude. But to the other side of that, to AWS's stance, while they, can't support the VMware kind of interface that they had on their side, this is a moment where, as I said, there's always something each year in tech that causes a big shift, and some interest moves in another direction. There's always something that is the catalyst for that. This is the catalyst for a lot of people who maybe had already been thinking about the cloud and what it could bring to their environment, and now saying, okay, well, if I'm going to pay 5 to 10 times as much for the same thing I was getting, might as well make the thing happen. So it's a big moment. And as far as it goes, there's a lot of ways this can shake out. The next 1 to 2 years are going to be very interesting.
Yeah. A realistic customer example, we had a customer who actually was using a freeware version of VMware. And that freeware version, they still had to keep maintenance if they wanted it to be supported. Even the freeware version was going up by something like 10x in cost for support. And then eventually that freeware version wasn't going to be supported anymore anyway. So it's a really compelling event. And I think it's put migrations back at the forefront of something that is top of mind for a lot of customers.
Yeah. So we've kind of laid out the problem a little bit. We've
Yep.
laid out the time frames. We've laid out kind of the potential increases in costs that customers can potentially expect by that. Let's get into a little more where we fit into this.
Yeah, it's a really great time for a partner like us right now. And I say for the next 3 or 4 years at least, this is going to be a very attractive topic for a lot of folks because, what we're trying to provide for the customers is a couple of things. One, the ability to keep your perpetual licensing on site. And what this does for customers is it prevents them from being able to not only take the cost increase, but also go through the headache of migrating from perpetual to SaaS licensing, to go through the headache of signing up for 3 more years with a business partner, if you will, who just raised your rates exponentially. And then it also allows customers and AWS teams that are doing migrations to move at a more realistic pace because we don't have the pressure of we have to get this done in order to order to be able to migrate to AWS. So we can pause effectively the challenge that VMware and Broadcom are bringing to the table and provide the customer with the ability to move at a realistic pace. But over and above that, we are also providing a real litmus test to how serious customers are to moving to the cloud. And that is, by engaging in this conversation, you can tell if a customer is predominantly ready to migrate to the cloud, but also we do other things like we run a lot of our projects on AWS Marketplace. And if a customer is pushing back on an AWS Marketplace account ID, that could be a red flag, if you will. And then lastly, we provide a ton of benefits out to the AWS partner community as well as AWS teams themselves by giving the customer the ability to not have to evaluate their competition and being able to drive to the cloud.
Yeah, the pause button's huge. It's this whole situation's kind of predicated on a truncated time frame that customers can't overcome in time before they have to sign on to these 3-year license agreements. This puts them in a situation where they can take the power back, take as long as they need to make the wisest decisions for their business going forward, which may be AWS, maybe other virtualization solutions that are out there, whatever makes sense for your business. But it gives you the time. And that's something that a lot of people are effectively being robbed of right now. So
It's true.
Let's get into it a little bit. Let's talk about the map gap.
Yeah, so we're dedicated to being an excellent additive partner to the AWS ecosystem. And if you haven't heard, MAP is the Migration Acceleration Program that helps offset the costs of customers' cloud migrations. And AWS has one of the most lucrative funding mechanisms that I've ever seen for migrations. So first of all, if you haven't evaluated it, you should. But, talking about this from an AWS perspective and really from what I see the challenge is even though AWS solves a lot of funding issues for customers, it doesn't solve them all. And in fact, at times it can be a little bit hard to move forward in the MAP program if you haven't already started to migrate and you don't have a true timeline for working backwards. So really where we help our AWS is for those customers who have MAP projects that are stalled or haven't been moving forward. We also look to alleviate some of that customer fear, uncertainty, and doubt. There's a lot of moving parts in the ecosystem today, and depending upon what products you've chose to use in the past, could really be dictating the winds of your future. And, we try to help eliminate some of that customer uncertainty, also reducing their cost and risk for migrating to the cloud. And then as you look at our partner community, we also help them with additional funding to offset some of the cost risks that our partners take on in migration efforts. And then lastly, if you look at it from an AWS lens, we keep GCP and Azure at bay by giving the customer the ability to stay with their on-premise licensing while they migrate potentially to AWS as their landing space.
Yeah, because as far as it goes, Google's offering these free migrations to GCP for your VMware workloads. But what if upon further evaluation with the benefit of time, the thing you're being robbed of, you realize GCP wasn't the right environment to you? The tool stack that AWS has is better, or Azure, whatever else makes sense to you, right, in your business. Time is the big factor here. That's the first thing we can buy you. But then also with that, we're able to assist you. We have a lot of background in this cloud space. AWS is where we're deeply rooted, but we're also, the nature of ReluTech's business also being deeply tied to hardware and things like that are some of these mechanisms we use to help fund these migrations, gives us a good understanding of what's best for the customer in this moment of transition, right? Because that uncertainty, it's the uncertainty of using a new tool. It's the uncertainty of costs that could balloon on you as you try to do something like this. It could be security uncertainty. There's so many along the way. So for us, luckily, we have kind of a broad experienced background over here where we can tackle a lot of those.
Yeah, and Seth has worked a lot with the MAP program and seen how it impacts from a customer perspective. Seth, do you have any thoughts on, kind of from that side on how we're addressing this challenge as well?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing from a customer perspective is you've seen on these last couple slides, even on this slide, there's a lot going on, and a lot that has to happen in a cloud migration, right, at the end of the day. And we're here, we put it on the first slide that we shared around reducing barriers to get to cloud. At the end of the day, we want to simplify the process. We want to take out that uncertainty. We want to take out the concerns. We want to take out the pressures, all the things you see here, by consolidating that data center infrastructure support. And thankfully, right, for us, the ability to now support from a VMware perspective, right? And so not only now can we consolidate all your data center contracts from a hardware break fix support, you tack on VMware, you talk about our ability to then do all the ITAD around that in partnership with AWS. Our goal is to simplify it, right? And take this data center issue or problem that a customer has. If they really want to get up to AWS or another cloud provider, make that as easy as possible. So for us, Ryan, what I've seen with customers is making it easy, like moving applications, moving workloads that are driving revenue for a business. It's complex, it's stressful, it's all those things. How do we take some of that other stuff off their plate and make it easy? And that's one of the biggest benefits we do for the partners and the customers we work with.
Yeah, it's a great point.
So this slide here that you just pulled up, I like this one because it's a bit of a hypothetical. This does vary depending on the company we're working with, the data center that they're in. But it's, a pretty common scenario as far as a pretty ordinary sized data center, not gigantic, not the smallest thing ever. But to give you an idea of some of the things we do to kind of unstick those gears in this mechanism of getting yourself wherever you need to be it on premise, be it in any of the clouds, but how do we make that easier for customers?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, this right here and it's an example, right? And this is whenever I'm talking to AWS teams, this is the example I give that really kind of helps hit home on how by bringing ReluTech in at the earlier phases of a migration for a customer, there's a few key areas that we can support, right? And I have in the top left 100K cash credits up front. This is just an example of a customer's data center who we value at, say, $100,000. Assuming that customer's data center is valued at 100K, we would give them 100K cash or credits up front for their data center and effectively buying that data center from them and removing those assets from the books. We then can term a lease back over those products over 18, 24, or 36 months, and we can take over their hardware break fix maintenance, removing that off of their plates and taking that as something that they no longer have to worry about at a reduction of at least 50% over whatever they're spending on hardware maintenance today. So in the case that I put here, if the customer has a $300K annual maintenance cost, we can reduce that immediately to about $150K or even less in most cases. And this really does two things for the customer. The first thing it does is it gives them a cash infusion upfront to offset that initial cost increase that they'll take on while migrating to the cloud. And it gives them an additional 50% reduction in the costs that they're spending on their hardware. But more importantly is it allows us to lay a timeline out for the customer to work backwards from in order to have a successful migration. In other words, we can term this out over 18, 24, 36 months, whatever the time of the predefined migration period would be. But effectively, this gets the customer also out of a CapEx model and into an OpEx model.
No, as far as it goes, what we're trying to do here is make it so that you can kind of focus your money in the opposite direction of where it'd usually be, which is where usually when you're starting this project, this migration, if so to speak, you're paying for the maintenance on all the data center you have right now. Like that's all still running. The lease, whatever rent is on the building, the data center, all of that is still in your possession. This is something that we can buy off of you, and you still get to use it. You're just a renter now, so to speak. That cash infusion now is on your books, and those depreciating data center assets are off your books. So from an accounting standpoint, well, you just freed yourself up for a big project like the migration, which was the reason for you getting on this in the first place. So now your funding's freed up at the start for the value of your data center. To actually, your data center is effectively funding your cloud migration, which of course is being done to get you off what? The data center. So like you said, you're working backwards. You kind of turn the cycle on its head. But it works from an accounting standpoint, which is really tough. When you're paying for two things at once, such as I'm paying for the resources to move my workloads, I'm now paying for some of those workloads to run while other workloads are still running on-prem, you see a lot of duplication. And that gets very costly. And if the migration gets delayed, even more costly. So we take a lot of that off of your hands, let alone the fact that once you migrate, you got to offload all that gear. So you're going to need to plan for that anyways.
Yeah. One thing I'd point out on this is we just mentioned it several times, double bubble spend. It's a term everyone's familiar with. All these things here you see on the screen help alleviate that double bubble. And the majority of the cloud migrations I've worked on for customers, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5 are not the problem, right? Like you're getting into a good run rate, you're optimizing, right? You're changing up applications and how they consume cloud. And those years look good, right, for the most part. It's year 1 where it's like, oh, to get there, I really need that business case to be net neutral, right, or in a more positive light for year 1. And that's really where we can help AWS partners and customers, as we've mentioned.
Yeah. And outside of that, now we're able to wrap that with the third-party VMware support, which, to tie it all back together, the reason that we're having this discussion is how do we fit in to pause effectively that customer's decision to move to VMware, provide them with cash to get them migrating out to AWS, and provide them with a reduction in costs around their hardware maintenance, which again can go to that double bubble spend or towards the migration effort. But more important, and I think we leave it off a little bit at times, is we are an amazing staffing company. And as you mentioned earlier, NerdRabbit recently got rolled up into ReluTech and is part of our family of offerings now. The ability to provide a customer with either individual staffing needs, short-term or long-term, or the ability to provide that customer with a squad of people, whether that be a couple of architects, a couple of engineers, and maybe some project managers, or whether you go as deep as needing some Gen AI expertise, we can build a squad for you as a customer and allow you to take advantage of your IT budget towards your staffing needs.
Yeah, and like you mentioned their IT budget, that's one of the really interesting things. Just to clarify there, staffing's not usually something that's going to go towards any sort of technical budget. The nature here at Nerd Rabbit, for anyone who's unaware, we are integrated with the AWS Marketplace. The usage of our platform, which allows you to engage cloud talent, allows you to build that through the AWS Marketplace so that it's a part of your AWS spend, which is typically an IT spend, not a HR budget. So it frees a lot of things up for people to be creative with their budgets. It allows you to take a cost like talent and apply that towards if you have enterprise discount program in place or anything like that, be able to achieve bigger discounts with something you might have already been spending money on, just not through the marketplace. And we are the only partner that really offers that. So there's a lot of ways we help with that. And one of the big things, also for someone in this migration phase particularly is one of the biggest customer, fears going into the cloud is we don't know the cloud yet. I think we talked about that a little earlier, but we built cloud centers of excellence for these exact companies. You're in the cloud now. You need a few kind of leading minds that can make sure that they know all the ins and outs and can train people around them and have a system in place to become a thriving cloud-based company. So a lot of ways to approach this, but there's a few key areas that here at ReluTech we try to help. And with a lot of the change over the last year, Nerd Rabbit merging into ReluTech, ChannelWorks merging into ReluTech, we have a pretty comprehensive solution at this point that I think is going to make a lot of big motions here in 2025, especially given the timeframes that have been presented.
Yeah, and I think the bigger part to me is that any one of these parts individually is okay, but when you bring all of these pieces together as part of a solution for a customer to solve their challenges, you're really doing a lot more than, the sum of the parts is greater than each individual part itself.
Yeah, these are big things that can seem complicated, but there are ways to simplify it and remove some of the common headaches. These are some of the ones that we approach, but just to kind of summarize this in closing, so right now there's a huge issue that customers are really facing in the next 12 to 24 months. The thing that they're going to be facing is that inevitably they're going to be faced with the renewal of their VMware licenses, and it is going to be more expensive than it was before. How much is uncertain for your particular environment, but it will be more expensive. We've already seen this happen a good bit. And when you find this out, you have about 30 days to make a decision, which at that point, if you're talking about a full-scale migration, is insufficient. We are here to help you hit the pause button on that particular problem. You don't need to get off VMware yet. We're going to make sure you can keep yourself there and start saving you money on how you're supporting that. Those are the first two things we're going to do, but then we're going to work with you to find the best plan. Whether it be a continued virtualized on-premise environment, a cloud migration, we're going to figure that out for you and figure out what the competencies we have where we can help. And when it comes to other partners that we work with who might specialize more in unique migrations or workloads, they're pointing you to the best help, because that's really what all this is about. We want to make sure that we're here just to remove headaches in the cloud. That's really what we've kind of done for over a decade in this space. And this is a unique headache that we think we have a strong proposition for over the next year or so.
Seth, anything you want to add in closing?
Going back to that analogy, Ryan, that you heard or came up with, which I love, is, the hurricane's coming, unfortunately. And I don't think there's a bunch of sway or movement in it, right? And it's never too early to start preparing. So if you're a customer, right, or a partner in the ecosystem, knowing this challenge is coming up, reach out to us. Don't wait. Amazon is hosting their big conference in a month that we'll be out at in full force. If you happen to be there, come find Ryan and myself, reach out to us. We'll put our information out here. Love to see you guys out there and talk about how we could solve this challenge for you.
Yeah, reInvent 2024. So we're going to have a number of people out there. So let our team know if you're watching and you want to meet up with the folks at ReluTech, learn a little more about what we're doing. Glad to talk to you out there. I think it's going to be a good time, as it seems to be just about every year over there. Cool. Well, as far as it goes, thanks both of you for coming on. Seth Hester, Ryan Norton, always a pleasure. To our viewers, until next time, thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.